Hey, all you Ethic cuties and the 40% of you who have still not subscribed to the Ethicsverse, what the heck's wrong with you? Welcome to the coolest place to be every Thursday at noon Eastern. If you think changing our workplaces can change our world, we got a real treat for you today. So glad to be back. This was like the highlight of my last 2 months was last week. So I have high expectations for today. We have a phenomenal panel, kind of some compliance all-stars here. So drop your LinkedIn in the chat. Like I always say, your network is your net worth. Neither are big enough. And you got to take advantage of this opportunity we have in our market that is highly collegial. Everybody's friends. You can learn so much, but all you got to do is kind of get over yourself and reach out to somebody and ask for some help. But in the pre-show, that's what I was really kind of talking about. I really learned that it's okay to ask for help. I've been a really independent person, and since I've had my injury, asking for help is something I've had to do consistently. And yes, it's a little bit humbling, but it's pretty nice getting grapes peeled for you. So give it a try. We're going to dive in. We got a phenomenal show for you. Like I said, we're going to be talking about the post-election breakdown. Some of us have been breaking down since the last couple of weeks, and so we're going to break it down a little bit more. Thanks, Melissa, for that joke. I got writers everywhere. We are also pushing. If you're not subscribed to this yet, you guys, you got to do this. Not subscribed. If you haven't taken 5 minutes to do this FTI survey, I really encourage you to do it. You're going to get the access to the results before everybody else. And last year's results were widely eye-opening. It's a really phenomenal group in FTI. They put a lot of thought into the survey. It takes like 5 or 10 minutes. So do it during these intros. Check the chat for that right now. That link should be coming in, or you can find it on the console. Let's keep it moving. We love learning around here, as you know. You know I love learning. You know I love reading. Readers are leaders. And let's learn is my motto for the year. So there's so much great content coming out, from the people on this panel. We, of course, know Matt Kelly, his Radical Compliance blog. That should be checked every single morning. Your team should be reading that, of course. Christy Grant Hart, if you're not following her on LinkedIn, you absolutely should. She puts up these little clips constantly that I love, that I learn from. And she has the Two Gurus podcast with Tom Fox, which is a lot of fun. It comes out every other week. And Hema Lomax has this really fun podcast that just launched called Unless. So if you have not subscribed to that yet, you can go to the Corporate Compliance Insights website and find it, or anywhere you check out your podcast. We had Tobias on a couple weeks ago, and I'd also encourage you to check out Adam Hunt on the Ethics Experts. We're going to be picking up episodes on that big time now that I am feeling healed and back on my feet. But if you haven't checked out the Adam Hunt episode, I really encourage you to. He's built a really cool program over at Netflix. Here's the Matt Kelly's blog. Again, this should be like on your homepage. You know what I'm saying? Like this should be your save screen on your phone, the Radical Compliance blog. I want to talk to you a little bit about this middle managers thing, because I'm going to keep talking about this next year. Probably forever. But the DOJ guidance really talked about how do we prove an effective program? Well, we can't have an effective program if we're not crowdsourcing risk intelligence at scale, right? That's what HEMA always says. Crowdsourcing risk intelligence at scale means that we need to activate and engage all the stakeholders in the organization, particularly those middle managers. So we have this really cool middle manager toolkit that got shouted out in this book that we're giving away today. I encourage you to check that out. People are 6 to 8 times more likely to go to their middle manager than they are to go to the anonymous hotlines that you have in place. So if you're not pulling reports from those folks, if you're not getting them to echo your chorus of the type of culture of compliance that you're trying to build, you're leaving a lot of impact on the table. And it's never been easier with Ethico's free. Imagine that, free. We don't even like making money around here. We just like giving away things. Free middle manager toolkit. So hit that, scan that, and so forth. Let me read you something here. This ethics, the Ethico ecosystem that everyone's talking about. People can't get enough of it. I want to read, this is a real quote here, okay? So this was too small last week. I'm going to read it real quick. I wanted to reach out and let you know that our team appreciates the exceptional level of support and service that Ethico has provided to this point. Your responsiveness, attention to detail, and willingness to go above and beyond for redacted have not gone unnoticed. From our first interactions with your team, it's been clear that customer satisfaction is the heart of the business. Please extend our gratitude to everyone involved. I love reading that because I love serving. I am the chief servant here at Ethico, and I love that kind of thing. Coming into next, we've just launched our Promised Land promotion. So if you feel like you're not getting the engagement you want, if you feel like the boutique service that you signed up for, it has long gone, if you feel like all the love is lost, and if you feel like you're not getting the traction or the impact or the engagement or the efficiency out of your program that you'd like, give us a look. If you book a demo by the end of the year, 15% and up to a year free. Who loves you? All right. What are we giving away today? We're giving away 2 of my favorite books. Like I said, this book Art of Ideation by Hema Lomax is phenomenal. Also, Ashley Derwin wrote this as well. And of course, the one and only Christy Grant Hart. She just keeps ripping out more and more books. This is your year as a wildly effective compliance officer. We're getting close to the end of the year, so keep those comments coming today and line up your next year with one or both of these books. Also, we're going to be giving away another 5. Okay, so I'm giving away, we said we were going to give away 5. I want to triple it today, okay? We're going to give away 5 of each of these books and also another 5 if you share your best takeaways from today. So with that, I'm going to pass it over to the coolest guy in compliance, the one and only Matt Kelly, who won, we were on the Oscar Awards for Compliance podcast the other day. It was a lot of fun. I finally got to interview Matt Kelly, which was a big honor, but also a little nerve-wracking because he's the king of these kind of panels. But how's it going, Matt? Welcome back to the Ethicsverse.
Well, Nick, it is going very good, very well. Thank you for that kind introduction. It was a lot of fun the other day when we were talking on Tom Fox's podcast awards ceremony. But for everybody who's joining us now, thank you. Today, we have a lot to cover. We want to talk about the incoming Trump administration, what that will mean for compliance programs, what sort of enforcement priorities might there be, what sort of enforcement priorities might go away. Also a bit about, frankly, what does it mean for a culture of ethics and compliance and for compliance officers? I've had a fair number of compliance officers a bit shell-shocked that Donald Trump is an ethically challenged example to hold up to people. And they're wondering, what does that say about ethics and compliance now that he is back in power and he won the election fair and square? And, they're kind of contemplating their place in the universe. So we have a lot to discuss here. And certainly if listeners have any comments you want to make, questions you want to ask, put them in the attendee chat. We love hearing the comments. We'll work those in. So there's me, there's Nick. Also with us is Hema Lomax, who has been a chief compliance officer at numerous large companies now, and these days is running her own chief compliance consultancy. And Hema, welcome. Thank you for being here.
So happy to be here. Thank you. I'm here.
And Christy Grant Hart, who also has been a compliance officer, is a compliance consultant, is a well-known compliance book author, and great thinker as well about corporate compliance issues. So, Christy, glad to have you here too.
It's the best. Thank you for having me, everybody.
All right. So I just wanted to start with sort of the big existential question. Here's something that it stuck with me. The day after the election, I got a comment from a very senior internal auditor, a good, sharp person who knows how to run an audit and compliance program. And he said he was glum, frankly, about not necessarily Donald Trump's policies or the Republican Party coming in. He was more glum about like I said, the flawed person that Trump is. He's basically, this means nobody cares about ethics and compliance. Look at how he ran his business. Nobody cares about this stuff. I'm not quite sure what the whole point of what we're doing is, because clearly if voters are putting him in, that means nobody really cares about what people like us do. Now, I think he's wrong, and I could expound for a while, but I first wanted to ask all of you three what your response to that sort of existential crisis might be. I'll maybe start with you, Christy, and then Hema, and then Nick. Like, talk this guy off the ledge. What would you say?
I would say that politics is not the same as being in your jobs. I think if we look at the exit data, there is a lot of information about being concerned with inflation, being concerned with other types of activities. Do I think that the personality is problematic? I do, but I also don't think that it is a reflection of people's sensibility about compliance and ethics, especially in their work. How he ran his business would be meaningful if we were in his business, but we're not in his business. We're in the business of what we're doing. So I would like to think that people made decisions on something other than character, and acknowledging that character is a problem. However, when it comes to equating that with our workforce, first of all, half the country didn't vote that way. And so I think we need to acknowledge that it isn't a monolith or a single thing. But I think that internalizing that as being reflective of our work or our roles, or a dismissal of that, is a personalization that isn't helpful.
Emma, what would you say?
Yeah, I couldn't agree more, Christy. Definitely unhelpful. Look, I can empathize with the feelings, the outrage perhaps that your friend has, but also there's a ladder of inference here, and he's way up it, right? In terms of what it actually means that we've had a result, an election result in this country. So I think it's a really useful moment. If you've got those emotions, if you're thinking that, ask yourself why, and also ask yourself what you can do in this moment. Emotion is information, outrage is information, and I think it's really important for us, especially in our roles as compliance officers, to remember who we are and remember what we're charged with when it comes to our organizations. We're charged with looking to help the whole entire body make ethical decisions. That's 50% of the country on one side and the other, and lots, I'd say, in the middle. So definitely unhelpful to be thinking that way. To the degree you see evidence of that, good. That's job security for you, right? We're specifically here to root out those issues and show how we can systematically make sure that those issues aren't pervasive. So I know we'll talk about it a lot. Lots of opportunity here. Remember who we are in terms of ethics compliance professionals. We've got a role as culture builders, and we really do want to avoid the tendency of turning our outrage into unhelpful sentiment that can be paralyzing. I know many people are talking about getting new passports and withdrawing and leaving the profession. Those are unhelpful sentiments. They're okay for the moment, but they shouldn't last. And we should be thinking about what we can do going forward.
Nick, what's your take?
Yeah, I agree. I mean, there's so much that's outside of our control. I mean, we're way closer to surfers than we are Poseidon, who's making those waves. You know what I'm saying? Like, we just have to ride whatever waves are happening. How do you like that? We have to ride whatever waves are happening. And like, if the game doesn't go our way, it doesn't mean that it's the end of the world. I would remind everybody that like we've already been through this before, right? Like there was 4 years that we've already been through this. The character didn't change that much from those first 4 years to these 4 years. And I think a lot of the fears, I'm just struck by how similar the fears are at this part, at this stage of the second, term as they were toward the first term. Like there was a lot of fears that we had that didn't sort of come to pass. And like, we've been through it before. And I think in any situation, there's always a way to take advantage of the circumstance. And so I think it's very dangerous, to Christy's point, is to assume that, oh my gosh, well, the sky is falling. Nobody cares about this stuff. And like, to your point, it was like an extremely close race. It was like 50 to 48 or 50 to 49 plus a bunch of other people voting for other things. And so I just think it's a very, I've never heard that, the ladder of inference, but like come down off that ladder of inference and see what you can do in your corner of the world. Like, even if you were out there, going door to door, knocking doors, like you didn't knock every door. And if you did, you didn't convince everybody. Like, what can you do around you? What can you do in your piece of the world or on your team or within your organization, irrespective of what's going on outside those four walls, or what's going on outside that sphere of influence, which is truly way smaller than we, tend to think.
What struck me with my friend who said that was like, people don't really care about ethics and compliance. And I said, no, you're wrong, with all due respect to him. Like, people might not like ethics and compliance, as they might view it as, I don't know, an intrusion or a burden right up until the thing happens. And at that point, when you're on the receiving end of sexual harassment, you witness some sort of fraud, you have your privacy data violated, something like that. Everybody cares about compliance then. The trick really is to demonstrate to people that there are many reasons why you want a good compliance program, regardless of who is in the White House and regardless of specific policies that may or may not change. A lot of this stuff still, you need a compliance program to address it, because it exists next to the big political climate. And yeah, that political climate is definitely still divisive. It's still a lot of uncertainty, and we can get into that. But like I said to him, nobody really loves compliance, but I don't think anybody hates it, because they always need it as soon as the thing happens. And then suddenly they're ready to give a strong compliance program a bear hug. It can't go away. We've got a lot of comments here, including some people who fairly point out a lot of people who are dismayed right now. There was an equal number of people dismayed 4 years ago. And Nick, I thought your point was great, that a lot of people were dismayed 8 years ago when Trump was clearly going to end FCPA enforcement. And no, he didn't. So there's things like that, but there's just a lot of risks and issues that persevere or prevail or endure regardless of who is in charge and who is setting a corporate regulation agenda. I would like to ask, actually, let me see. I think maybe I'll just start with some of the new priorities that we expect the Trump administration to have. It's a little bit hard to figure out right now. We've got a lot of personnel appointments that are very jarring, and we don't know how that will translate into actual regulatory priorities. But what would you all three think are going to be big things that companies and their compliance programs are still going to have to worry about, at least for the next 12 to 18 months? Christy, what would you say?
I would say sanctions. I know that there is a sense that the war in Russia and Ukraine will end quickly. May that be right? I hope. But I think that, during the first Trump administration, there was a strong focus on sanctions against Iran. I think those will come back up again. Just this morning, the ICC, the International Criminal Court, indicted Benjamin Netanyahu and the deputy. That's going to be a very big political experience. Yep. And so I think that sanctions in general are something we're not going to get away from. I would bring up the fact that OFAC has extended the statute of limitations for most sanctions violations to 10 years. So that's 2 more administrations that we're going to be going through while we still have enforcement for things that might be happening today. So I think that sanctions are not going away, and OFAC is not going away. And as a political weapon, they're so strong that I think that they're going to ratchet up, if anything.
I think you are absolutely correct. I think also that people should remember the FCPA could be used as a political tool. You want to punish your opponents in Venezuela or Iran or something like that, bringing FCPA enforcement against companies that are doing business there, or bringing those new FIPA charges where you can charge the actual local government official. Another great way to exercise political power through law enforcement mechanisms. So there's a lot of stuff that I think is still going to happen where you still need a strong compliance function. But Hema, what's your take? And then Nick as well.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. Sanctions is going to be interesting. FCPA will continue. I don't want to be controversial, but I don't think very much is going to change, Matt. I think it's going to be very similar. Like, we're going to be continuing business as usual. You may find that you've got increased interest in some of the issues that you've been dying to get interested in. For example, there's forced labor in the supply chain might become more interesting when we start talking about immigration more. That's clearly on the policy agenda of the Trump administration, but there are adjacent issues that start to emerge when you think about supply chain due diligence, human rights. While we think ESG might go away, it's definitely not going away in the hearts and minds of consumers. Shareholders, stakeholders are still interested in this. And even if it's politically polarized in the US, the EU and Asia are going full steam ahead on these places. And we're still going to be multinational companies dealing with a global audience. And so as these things tend to go in yin and yang, if there's even a sentiment that something's not going to be important, you'll get a backlash where customers will be asking even more questions. Vendors and suppliers will be asking even more questions. So that big behemoth, the third-party risk management, is not going away. It never will. But you might find that you get some more momentum. And yeah, I see Iveta Wetnick says forced labor will be at the top. I don't doubt that. I think it's really important. I think it's something. When we're talking about polarization, I think we can all get behind the idea that we don't want sweatshops in the US. We don't want to be having child labor in our supply chain. So again, Nick, I know you talk about opportunities. Another opportunity to really think about what unites us and where can we now get more attention to areas that, quite frankly, we've struggled in the past to get attention on. Not for any political reason, just because our job is hard. Think about where our job might be easier now, given the various narratives that are out there.
Nick, what would you say?
Well, that thing, like if you get like a red car, you start seeing red cars everywhere. You know that thing? I think Yep. We, as human beings, we have this like tendency to kind of create, look for like confirming evidence. And I think if you're really hurt or you're really excited about how this turned out, you're going to be looking for confirming evidence, to like avoid whatever that cognitive dissonance is, right? And so if you're looking for this cognitive dissonance, or if you're trying to avoid this cognitive dissonance on a subconscious level, and you end up like inadvertently looking for confirming evidence, you could start to see like, oh my gosh, it's all different. Oh, it's all falling apart. Or you could start seeing like, yep, that's why these people are stupid, or that's why these people are evil. And I think we have to like consciously fight against that, because there's a lot of opportunity here to fix our workplaces. Like, that's what I think. I mean, I'm kind of in your camp, Emma. I think it's going to be way more the same as it was than it is different. Of course, there's always going to be differences and stuff like that. I used to work for a guy who was like a raging Republican, and he it was right during when Obama was going into his second term, and he was like every day. I mean, he thought Obama was like the Antichrist. And I was just always like, it's not that different. Like, it's kind of the same. We've already just kind of lived through this. And, he was just always finding these things that like I frankly wasn't seeing. And I think if we don't guard against our own sort of cognitive errors that we're all kind of wired with and we're all prone to, then we're not going to be able to see the opportunities that we have in front of us to build bridges right now and, give people a voice that maybe didn't feel like they had a voice, or to, make the change that is possible in, again, our corner of the world. Like, I just see this as a massive opportunity. Like, anytime there's change, there's massive opportunity. That's been true in my life, whether, something goes the way I want or the way I don't want. Even on like a micro level, I'm saying in terms of losing a client or whatever. Like, anytime there's change, there's opportunity, because there's this reshuffling. And I just think like getting scared by this, keeping our head down, being sort of depressed by it, like, of course, lick your wounds, whatever, but like, this is the reality of the situation. We have to kind of roll with the punches, and we need to make the impact. Like, our mandate is to make the impact that we're supposed to make, regardless of whether it's raining outside or not. You know what I mean?
Hema, I wanted to circle back to you, because you had mentioned before when we were planning for this that the day after the election, you were at a securities and enforcement conference that kind of talked as soon as they quickly could about the implications of what had happened the day before. And you also worked at the Securities and Exchange Commission through presidential administrations. So like, talk to us about what was said there, or what your experience is, and sort of the continuity that we are likely to see, or what that continuity might look like.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Thank you for asking. So, many of you may know that I worked there for 11 years in the enforcement division at the Securities and Exchange Commission, and I was there in 2016 with the first Trump administration. As you said, I attended the Securities Docket Enforcement Conference in the DC region the day after the election. And one of the questions on everyone's mind was, what will be different now? And this was current and former SEC officials, mainly in the local bar. And I will say I'll give you some thoughts that were shared, but the overwhelming sentiment of those of us that have worked there, we've seen this before, is very little will change. I mean, a number of these cases that are in place today were initiated during the Trump administration, because they take so long, number one.
Right.
Number two, I can tell you personally from personal experience, even though I can't speak for the SEC, I was never told to stand down a case because of politics. And certainly that's not something we expect to be seeing. That's number two. Number three, the priorities may change, on the edges. So for example, the debate around cryptocurrency, that's yet to be had again. I know we're hearing in the news even today that the current administration is thinking about appointing a cryptocurrency czar. Well, they didn't say cryptocurrency will never be regulated. They said we need somebody to look at it afresh and see if maybe the SEC has gone too far. It's a good question that I think may be asked across the spectrum. We'll probably see, for example, less big fines on things like off-channel communications. That's not to say that the law is going to change immediately and now we can all do what we want. We're just thinking about the level of enforcement and what the attention is. And the attention will invariably shift to other things. So certainly consensus, there will be some changes around the edges, but for the people that work there, myself included, we kind of know that nothing really changes. I actually went to a retirement party at the SEC last night. And you'll laugh. This is something that might unite a lot of you. One thing that people were worried about was, would they have to come into work 5 days a week in January? They really were concerned about their remote versus flexible working. And it was a question, not a mandate. Like, no one said that's going to happen. But certainly, again, back to the ladder of inference, we start to worry about various things, the small things, the big things. But in the end, it will be business as usual in many, many ways. I don't think the DOJ are going to change their guidelines. I don't think we're going to have a different definition of a culture of compliance or an ethical decision making. Right. So I think, again, just to bring it back down again, there's a lot of people on both sides of the spectrums that agree that we should have responsible business and responsible growth. And that's the only sustainable way to continue when it comes to the corporate world. And so I feel very confident, as did everyone really at the conference, that there was not going to be a massive sea change when it comes to enforcement, just a few things around the edges, as I said. And those things aren't really going to affect us that in massive ways, because our day jobs, if you go back to the elements of an effective compliance program, we just need a space where people can speak up about the issues that are relevant to your organization.
That's right.
No one's got an ESG hotline or a trade hotline. They've got a hotline, and what's relevant will still be there for your employees.
That's a great point.
So let me shift gears to another question. I'll put Christy first and then Nick. One of the attendees, I'm sorry I didn't see who, but they had mentioned something like racial discrimination. And might we see more instances of that if we have this ethically degraded environment? Or will there be less enforcement around that? Well, my point to that person would be, even if there was less enforcement against racial discrimination, it's not like your risks of having a discriminatory culture go away. You'll just get sued in private litigation. And earlier today, I was reading a story about a major real estate brokerage where they basically fired 2 of their top long-term executives for allowing a sexually harassing culture. And so now they have this big unwanted press. Their stock price has gone in the tank over the last 2 years. Their leader for the next generation, well, he got fired. So, okay, even if there isn't enforcement, that doesn't mean the risk has gone away. The risk is transformed, but the antidote is still a strong corporate culture to be able to root this stuff out. So Christy and then Nick, give me your take on this. And, like, these fundamentals are still going to have to be there.
Okay, I have a lot to say about this. There are 50, I think, state attorneys generals. Many of them care a lot about this. The EEOC is not going away, right? The equal opportunity. The ability to sue privately for these things and have judges and arbitrators hear these kind of cases is not changing. So when it comes to something like, will there be more political expression at work where people feel like they can make those types of comments? I don't know, maybe. But the idea that there's somehow going to be no consequences to that is, to me, a little bit crazy. And the fact that the administration may not care about it as much within the White House or within those organizations, I think changes nothing for our organizations, because those disciplinary measures still exist, the code of conduct still exists, respect in the workplace still exists, and enforcement from a legal perspective still exists. So I think that this one is one to not lose sleep over.
All right.
I agree 100%. I think it's dangerous. I think, like, if we're feeling like there's risk, the opposite of what, Christy is saying, I think it's rooted in a misunderstanding of what the other side is. I just do. I think, like, I don't think the average person who voted red would say, I don't care about ethics. It might seem that way from the other side, for sure. But, like, I don't think that, like, to your point, like, none of this stuff is going away. Those controls that are in place, those protections are not going away. And somebody said in here, I had it marked and then I scrolled past it. But it might actually, I love this perspective. It might make it easier for us to, root out wrongdoing, root out toxicity in the organization. If somebody feels more comfortable, exerting or, sharing sort of a toxic viewpoint, well, that might make your investigations go better. So maybe your case closure time is going to come down. You know what I'm saying? Like, there's going to be bright spots in this, and, like, it's always changing. The world is always evolving. The priorities from 3 years ago are not the same as the priorities now. ESG, for example, was in every single conversation 3 years ago. I'm not hearing about it as much anymore. To Hema's point from before, it doesn't mean that people just don't care about the environment and they're just, like, littering and, like, burying batteries in farm fields. Of course people still care about it. Of course people are still wired for fairness and justice. Like, everyone, that's in all of our DNA. Our picture of what those things are might be a little bit different, but I think we need to remember that it's going to be a lot more the same than it is going to be different. And those protections are still going to be in place, like Christy said. I'm just really kind of echoing what she said at this point, which is really what a lot of my job has turned into, be echoing these three.
Another question that I wanted to explore is, a lot of compliance officers eat, breathe, and sleep the guidelines for an effective compliance program from the Justice Department. They also very closely follow the corporate enforcement policy at the Justice Department, which is, if you voluntarily self-disclose, if you cooperate in the investigation, if you remediate the weakness, you will get some very favorable treatments from the Justice Department to resolve the case. Does anybody think that will change out of the three of you? Anybody? Or is it going to pretty much stay as is?
Okay, no, I don't think it's going to change. Go ahead, Emma.
No, we're agreeing. Back to the enforcement conference I attended, and this was one of the topics. That the most important thing that they said was a continuing priority is cooperation and what that looks like. Making their job easier, basically, is cooperation. And whistleblowers, again, making sure that you're making space for that speak up culture. So I don't think that, as I said before already, I don't think the guidelines will change. Those enforcement agencies will be there. There's lots of things that will be enforced and continue to be enforced. So yeah, Angela also says she doesn't anticipate any changes. I think what's really helpful is for us to look at the things, again, turn your outrage into information. Like the things that you really think you care about weren't perfect last week, right?
Right.
So if you care about DEI enforcement, I'm sorry, our track record as a planet has not been good on that. So there's plenty you can be doing locally to make it easier for somebody to never have to get to the EEOC, because you can handle it internally. There's work to be done there. And let me be clear, I don't speak for the SEC and the DOJ, but underneath all that guidance is a request. They're begging us to make risk relevant internally. They're asking us to deal with it ourselves effectively, so that they never have to look at it. And I think that, if you've got some extra energy as a result of this recent election, that's really where we maybe need to challenge it as ethics and compliance professionals. Channel it there, because there are some things you really care about that we're really not clean on internally. We need to do some work ourselves on how we can improve that locally. And that will mean that those government agencies never have to touch it, because we're handling it ourselves well.
I love that.
Christy, I don't know if you have any other follow-up thoughts, and then maybe Nick too, but what else would you say on this point?
Look, I think that a good compliance program is a good compliance program. Where I think there could be differentiation is which companies do get prosecuted. I think that certainly, to your point, Matt, that if there are political decisions influencing which companies get prosecuted, that doesn't mean no one gets prosecuted. And that doesn't mean no one gets cooperation credit. And frankly, self-disclosure makes their jobs easier. So I don't think that, is it possible that 2 or 3 of these get stopped because of friendships in the government or, political pressure to not put that one through? That's absolutely possible. That also doesn't change things like the media environment where people are reporting catastrophes and disasters, or the senators, Boeing's not going to suddenly not have the monitors, something like that, or if the plane window comes out, people notice that stuff. So I think that your compliance program guidance isn't going to change. Enforcement may change against certain companies, but I don't think that, to Emma's point about modern slavery, people aren't happy about modern slavery, and they're never going to be happy about bribery either. So who gets prosecuted may be different, but in terms of what the reaction is from the government and whether or not they'll change the ECCP to say, nah, compliance isn't important, I don't see that.
Yeah, and like any perceived change in who gets prosecuted is not going to make its way down into how we score our risk assessments. You know what I'm saying? Like you're still going to look at those risks as important risks kind of regardless until until the DOJ is shut down or something like that, which again, I just don't think is going to happen. I just think there's like such a, there was a comment here from Lee. Thanks for this comment, Lee, where she said, I think whistleblowing hotline usage will diminish. I don't think so. I think there is a huge portion. I mean, you can see it from all the exit polls. There's a huge portion of the population that felt like they haven't had a voice, and maybe they're feeling like they have a voice. And so I think we need to lean into that and get more of that. Like in any organization, regardless of which way it tilts, left or right or whatever, people are not speaking up enough. And I think like if we can lean into this and say, hey, this is an idea of meritocracy, and we can fight against whatever stereotypes that, the other side has for the side that we're on. We can see that we probably have a lot more in common than we do have different. And it's a way for us, again, to unlock a lot more of this risk intelligence that's kind of drifting throughout the organization. That's how I kind of look at
it. We have a couple of listeners who have asked how specifically we might think about healthcare going through change. And I don't know if anybody here is comfortable talking about healthcare compliance specifically, but for example, we now have Dr. Oz is going to be running the Medicare and Medicaid programs. Questionable at best, given that he.
But have you seen that show though? He always had an answer, didn't he?
Well, that's the thing. First off, I haven't, but he is a TV talk show host who's going to be running one of the biggest departments in the federal government. But he's already talking about changing up some of the billing codes that the American Medical Association puts together. I don't know what that means. There is a lot of ambivalence about that, but I would just point out that just because Dr. Oz is talking about it, I don't know how quickly that translates into real political change within healthcare. It's a huge business. There are an awful lot of healthcare concerns that traditionally have aligned with Republicans that are going to be very nervous about this. I think there's a lot of people in Congress who would be nervous about making big changes as well. I don't know. I would just wanted to call out that there are listeners here who are specifically from healthcare who are wondering what this might mean at a more practical level. I don't know if anybody here wants to take a shot at that, but it's something
it was between Dr. Oz and House, right?
Well,
Doogie Howser, MD. Doogie
Howser. Sorry, go ahead.
I'll take it. Look, I'm not a healthcare compliance expert by any means, but I like Elizabeth's point. You know, let's not presumptively assume the nominations are given. It's not just about the nominations. You made a great point there, Matt. I say these words all the time. How do we operationalize our intentions? It's hard, right? And any administration that might state campaign promises is going to have a hard time operationalizing those intentions and meeting those promises. So the current administration has exactly the same challenges, number one. That's if you know that what they've promised is the wrong thing. And I don't think any of us can say that decidedly. I can't say that about healthcare. But let's say that were the case. Also, I would say, because of what Elizabeth says, stay in the conversation, right? If you're in the US, you live in a state, you can pick up the phone and speak to your senator, right? Your senator might not be the one that you voted for, but it will be your senator. You can be part of the conversation. You can influence the decisions. There is going to be a debate when it comes to the nominations, for sure, right? Even though we think all four branches are now dominated by one side of the political spectrum, that doesn't mean there's no more debate to be had and there's no more conversation. So laugh as we might about the individuals and their qualifications, they will be put to the test. We know this, right? They will. And if you've got an idea about this, if you are an expert in healthcare compliance, then now is the time for you to channel your outrage into action and make those representations. I know you may feel powerless, but we must remember our power, right? As individual citizens, but also as compliance leaders of an organization. I also, just before I'm on my soapbox, I'm going to go back to something you said before about the hotline maybe diminishing. Lee, I think there is one way that the hotline reports will diminish, and that's if us as compliance professionals draw a line in the sand and act like we only support half of the population. Right? That's where we lose trust. That's why people won't speak to us. It's not because of who the government is. It's because of how we respond as compliance professionals. So our job in terms of local remedies is to make sure that people feel seen, heard, and valued when they do speak up to us, no matter what their political leanings. And so that just wanted to share that with you as well, because I think we need to look at that opportunity. The conversation can be had if we bring down those barriers. And what a great opportunity now to bring down some of the barriers. And for those of you that are asking, how could this happen? Ask it in another way. How could this happen? What am I missing? What else could be true? What people could be thinking? Like, really find the answers to those questions, because you're more likely to have the dialogue that will then impact healthcare compliance, trade compliance, sanctions compliance. I think if we can make sure we're in the conversation and not signing out of the conversation, we're going to be much more productive in our roles, but also individually.
I just wanted to add that, people who wonder, will we see a decrease in hotline use? We should remember that a lot of things that come in over the hotline, they might not be regulatory compliance problems, but they're still problems. And a good engaged management should want to know about this. The alternative is nobody tells management about anything that's going wrong. I don't know any board or management who'd say, oh yeah, that's fine. That's a perfectly okay culture. To a certain extent, there are a lot of things compliance officers worry about that are not necessarily compliance risks. They can be, but they're also other things. You would want to know about fraud going on in the company, regardless of whether it is a False Claims Act violation or just fraud. One of your suppliers is taking you for a ride. CFO still wants to know that. Somebody's going to have to investigate it.
Yep.
Sexual harassment claims that might lead to a lawsuit, or a food safety claim that might lead to shareholders suing the company in Delaware, things like that. Hema, you had mentioned supply chain visibility before. That absolutely is going to be true, regardless of whether it's for corruption or lousy cybersecurity or something else. So partly, I think, an important point here is for compliance officers to emphasize they are useful for risk management. What kind of risk? Incidental. If you don't know what the risk is and you don't know how to manage it, does it really matter if it's operational or compliance or otherwise? So the more you can be a good risk management capability for the enterprise, the better. And that's still going to be true, again, regardless of what Elon Musk and Donald Trump may or may not be doing for the next 4 years.
We should have just seen 1,000 emojis off of that. I mean, that is like the point of our lives right there. Like everything we do at some level is tied to quality. Whether you want to call it risk mitigation, like everything we're talking about is how do we adhere closer to this ideal of what quality is. A well-run quality organization doesn't have sexual harassment. They're not taking bribes. They're not having food recalls, all those kinds of things. And obviously these regulations, at least at their core, are put in place to try to prevent these bad things from happening. So to your point, like reframing what our role is should open our eyes to like many more opportunities for us to have the impact that like we can have within our organization. And Hema, what you said was phenomenal. Like I feel so energized and so like encouraged by that, by what you said. We can't give our power away. Like it's up to us whether we turn that power up or we turn it down. And that can be a function of the world that we're seeing and the lens that we're looking through. Take those glasses off, clean them off, dust yourself up, put your mouthpiece back in, and like let's line up again and go have the impact that like we can have regardless of who's in office, you know?
But now, Christy, let me put the question to you. How easy or difficult or how skillfully can compliance officers make that case to senior management and the board? What have you seen or what do you think the challenges are?
In terms of getting
being able
the
to
speak up culture?
reframe why the compliance team is here and why it's useful no matter what's going on in DC, because we help with risk, period.
Right.
How often are compliance officers making that argument successfully?
Well, I think one of the things that we can fail on is relying too much on DOJ enforcement and things like that. If we actually look at the FCPA enforcement over the last year and a half, we haven't had a lot of big blockbusters. And that's been problematic to a certain degree, but ultimately, we need to be a value add to the company. And if you look at things like, the ethics premium, if you look at how good companies run, if you look at the disengagement numbers and how that affects turnover and staffing and people not wanting to work at companies with bad reputations and choosing places that align with their values, those things don't change. So I think we continue to make the economic case, and perhaps it's not as strongly rooted in the boogeyman of enforcement action, but maybe it's more rooted in the economics of having a strong culture makes a good company that is more profitable, that doesn't spend all its time worrying about litigation bills, that is much better to stop the problem in the beginning. So it may change our focus a bit in terms of how we're talking about the enforcement environment. But to the major changes in the healthcare system and things like that, anybody who's ever worked with an organization of, say, 100,000 people, think about how hard it is to just put in a third-party program. I mean, it's really difficult, right? That's a small thing compared to redoing the entire Department of Justice or undoing all of Medicare and Medicaid.
Great point.
When you look at administrations, they typically have one big thing, right? Trump won, got the tax cuts in, Biden did the Inflation Reduction Act. They can't change everything no matter how much they want to, right? So what is the thing that they will get done, whether it's tariffs or massive deportation or what? There will be something, but it isn't going to be everything. And a lot of those things, depending on your industry, may not affect it as much.
What a great point that is. Like everyone says a bunch of stuff to get elected, and like this always happens. This happened in my high school class president thing. Everyone's talking about all the things that they're going to do, and very few of those things end up happening. And we can fall into this trap of like believing all that stuff is going to happen, and again turning into my old boss and thinking the sky is falling. And I don't think that's true. And one other point I just want to make. Here's one I will make right now is that like you just have to assume that half of your company is on either side of this thing. And like, if we're going to build this culture that we want, a culture of speak up, a culture where people feel engaged, a culture of belonging, all these things that we need in order to prove that we have an effective culture of integrity or prove that we have an effective culture of compliance, right? Being able to demonstrate that, it's going to take activating both of these halves of the whole. And so if we start demonizing the other side, or if you've been on the other side for the last 4 years, and now you feel, great that now you have this power and you have this desire to start kind of twisting the knife, all that's going to do is drive more division. And like, just, if you don't like the goodness of what I'm talking about, if that's not resonating with you, selfishly think about, for you to be effective, you need to activate both halves of this whole. So fight against those tendencies you have and like leave your politics out of it. That's what I try to do. And I try to just take advantage of the pieces that are on the chessboard, because that's what it required. That's what's required of us to have the impact that we are, mandated to have.
I wanted to take a few minutes to talk about Elon Musk and Vivek Ramaswamy and their government efficiency task force, committee, department, whatever they want to call it. Some people were talking about it a few minutes back in the attendee chat. So for everybody listening who has not yet seen it, the two of them did publish an article in the Wall Street Journal last night describing how they want this to work. And they basically said they are going to eliminate half of federal regulations by somehow determining which ones exceed the agency's authority to adopt them. Then they said they're going to have a one-to-one correspondence between reducing regulation and reducing the workforce. So we eliminate half of regulations, we're going to eliminate half of the workforce and save the government $2 trillion. To be clear, that is not possible. And I actually was doing the math to write a column about this morning. There are 2.3 million federal government employees. 1.4 million of them are uniformed military members. So if you do the math to cut it from 2.3 to 1.15, which is half, you can't do it. You would have to wind up cutting every single government employee. Donald Trump, the chief of staff, your food safety inspectors, the TSA folks at the airport, the ones who send out the Social Security checks, the ones who do healthcare compliance, the bank examiners, everybody else, and you still wouldn't have enough. You'd have to cut soldiers. Likewise, if you discount federal debt payments on the federal debt, if you discount Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, and Veterans Affairs, you put all that spending aside, the total amount of the rest of the federal government spending, 1.7 trillion. You want to cut 2 trillion, you can't. I actually would not worry too much about, oh my God, they're going to cut this, that, and the other thing. I don't think that's true. I think this is a setup so that they can then go to Trump, who will then say, well, I have executive authority to do this, that, and the other thing with the independent agencies. That's what I want. And that's the real goal, not to cut. It's to give more executive power to Donald Trump or whomever might be president in the future. That may be problematic. But I did want to put that out there. And I don't know if anybody else has any thoughts about Elon and the Doge Committee or whatever we're going to call it. But clearly it's something on the attendees' minds. Anybody else on the panel want to sound off about what might be happening there?
So I saw this Milton Friedman interview from it looked like 83 or something. And he was talking about if he was king, what he would do. And it was a really interesting perspective from, this old economist who's very famous for that article he wrote back in the day. And, there is a thing called government bloat for sure. There is a ton of spending. I think 12, if you look at the graph of government spending, it's going kind of parabolic. That is a tax on our dollar. All these things are true. And so, I would kind of look at Ireland is a great example of this. A lot of this stuff is perception over reality. To your point, Matt, I think Jim just said this in the chat, a lot of these things are just talking points. When Ireland deregulated and dropped their tax rate, they had an influx of foreign investment into Ireland, which was very great for their GDP, great for the standard of living over there. Everybody made a lot more money because the perception was that Ireland was, a lower, had a lower sort of regulatory load or a lower tax load for foreign investment. And so if that perception, if they can sell this externally, if Doge can sell this externally, it could be it could prompt a lot of investment back into the United States. And I think a lot of us are not thinking about the potential expansionary pressure that these changes can have on our businesses, which that potential is there. It's a non-zero number for sure. And so it could be a good thing for our individual businesses, irrespective of, who gets cut and so forth. I think your article is smart, Matt. I think you doing the math on that helps put a lot of this in perspective and helps give credence to what Jim was saying, that a lot of this stuff is posturing and words and tweets and all that kind of stuff. At the end of the day, all these things have to actually happen. And the odds of everything that they said happening, or, the odds of them saying, or the odds of everything that they said would happen actually happening is also, that is a zero number. You know what I mean? The odds is zero. Yeah. Okay. I'll clean that up on the replay. We'll chop that up. Sorry. Go ahead.
Christy or Emma, do you have any thoughts?
Yeah. Last time I checked, a civilian can't tell the government to not have regulations. I mean, we have Congress to do these things, and we have to change things according to the way that they're written and the way that the government functions according to everything from the Constitution forward. So some individuals saying, yeah, no, we're not going to do any of, we're just going to not have these things anymore. This is not realistic. So I think that, there may be a benefit to that. I also think, I lived in London during the Trump 1 administration. And Europe has a very strong response to some of these things, right? Particularly when it comes to, they've got new Modern Slavery Act, they've got the new AI Act. They're really playing hard in the due diligence directives and the CSRD. We are not going to suddenly be able to work in a vacuum. We have to work with each other in global environments. And so, if we have a country responding, look at the tariffs thing, right? Trump is saying we're going to have 20% tariffs on everything. It was a Wall Street Journal, the Washington Post yesterday was talking about how the ambassadors of Europe are saying, okay, do you really want retaliation here? And the Mexican president is saying, you better not do this stuff because it'll come back at you. So we live in a global environment. The Trump administration and what it wants to do is affected by the world, and our businesses are affected by the world. So I think, the way that the laws are going, especially with supply chain, there's so much more interaction that's happening, and there's so much more required of us in that space. That's not going away. Even if you are a small American company, you probably either sell into California that is not going to stop worrying about environmental regulation. You may sell into the world's largest bloc. You may have imports from China. If there's a trade war there that escalates, what does that mean for you? We can't live in a vacuum here. The new administration is going to have an effect, but we're having effect from everywhere else that responds to that too.
Hema, can I put it to you to talk a bit more about that global dimension to all this? Because you had mentioned that as well before, that just because the United States might lurch off in some regulatory way, there's still the European Union. There are still other countries. They still have a lot of regulations. The EU AI Act is a great example of it. But, how compliance officers sort of need to keep their eye on a global ball, and that, the U.S. is only going to be one part of how that ball spins.
Well, look, I think just to take another angle of this, as compliance professionals, we can all be frustrated at times with the plethora of the behemoth amount of legislation that's coming at us from all angles, right? It does have long-arm jurisdiction. It does apply to us in the US. It does apply when we want to operate in those situations. So using that empathy, you can see the sentiment behind the bureaucracy busting, the sentiment that's behind the idea of reducing regulation oversight. Okay, I'm not taking a political position here. I'm just saying, let's wonder what the goal is here, whether the math is right or not. So number one, I think, just as we criticize sometimes the number of things we as compliance professionals have to look at and understand and apply from the global regulators, I think it's a worthwhile exercise to do that here as well in the US. I'll say that there. But yes, to echo what you said, to echo what Christy said, those things are not going away, but more importantly, the people that have lobbied for those things, our customers, our employees, our investors, our stakeholders, they're not going away. Those laws tend to have come from somewhere, right? They tend to be the manifestation of the will of the people. And so, yes, we do care about the environment. Yes, we do care about responsible AI. Yes, we do want to make sure that when you disclose something to an investor, it's true. It's not materially false. And I think, again, we can align on those things. I've advised on these things a number of times. What we don't want is a different approach for a different jurisdiction. It's bad enough to be a global compliance officer. I do not want my one approach for Europe, my one approach for India, my one approach for the US. And so, obviously, there will be a rise to the top, right? We will not raise to the lowest common denominator, but we will rise our corporate compliance operations to those global regulations. And so I think it's an opportunity, again, for those of you that are looking for ways to advocate internally for a higher standard than you perceive might be the case in the next 4 years. Go to your customers in the EU, go to your customers in Asia. You might find, if you check the numbers, that the revenue from those areas is big, right? And significant. And you don't really have an uphill battle arguing these issues. So again, figure out what's important to you and use the global landscape as evidence that these things aren't going away and that you've got points to argue for better, more enhanced procedures internally. Because again, we're not at a panacea today that's going to disappear in the next 4 years after January. We're at a position where we need to do more in all of those spaces. I mean, thank God, as I said, we're always going to be in business compliance professionals because there's always going to be regulation and there's always going to be a range of how effectively we're applying those regulations. Then if you don't agree with those regulations, that's a different issue. Go ahead, Matt, sorry.
Here's a theory I have. I would take the example of how we have handled privacy over the last 10 years. So the United States talked about adopting a national privacy law, never has, in my opinion, probably never will. And what happened was the EU stepped into that vacuum with the GDPR. And then because we still in the US couldn't figure it out, now we have all these states that have adopted new privacy laws that are GDPR-ish. They're clearly taking their cues from that. And I could easily see a scenario where, for example, regulation of AI is going to follow the same pattern, because we are not going to have a national AI regulation. President Trump, or President-elect Trump, has already talked about repealing Joe Biden's AI regulation. It's not actually a thing. He published an executive order, but the actual regulations are few. So what's going to happen is states are going to adopt their own AI laws, and we're going to wind up with a patchwork. I fear this might even happen with cybersecurity regulations, because they are looking at dismantling the cybersecurity internet critical infrastructure security agency and letting those powers devolve to the states. So there's still going to be an awful lot of regulatory change management that is not going to recede. If anything, I think it might only go up. Christy or Nick, I don't know if you have any thoughts about these kind of other multidimensional pressures that are still going to be kicking around with compliance teams.
Sure. I think that privacy is a great example, and AI is a great example. For the next 2 years, probably, and maybe 4, there's going to be a singular government. If the Republicans decide that AI is important or privacy is important, or they're trying to take some preemption so that the states can't all do something different, they will. Or they'll at least attempt to do so. Do I think that anything that we in compliance are focused on is going to be at the top of the list? Maybe. I don't foresee it. I don't see anything that they've been talking about that'll be the top of the list for our regulations. I think that we're more important than ever in terms of, especially things like cities are adopting AI regulations for, especially in employment, when you have to, disclose that you're using AI in resume reviews, or some people apparently are having, AI interviews. I mean, it's kind of a crazy idea. So the more that we get states, cities, and all these different approaches, the more we are necessary to try to make something that works as well as possible for all of it. And it's a really difficult job, and it's not going to get easier. So I think that the states filling the vacuum is the worst possible outcome for us, but it's the best possible outcome too, because job security.
Right.
Nick, I'll give you the last word, because I know we're pretty much at the end of the hour here. But
are we? I feel like we're just getting going here.
Really? Yes. We can go for the rest of the day. But what would you say?
Yeah, I mean, I think what Christy said, and Hema kind of echoed this earlier. People in our space, whether it's HR, it's ethics, compliance, we all seem to be highly resilient people. We all seem to be fighters. We all seem to be survivors, and we all seem to be people that want to leave the world better. And so that's the common thing that I hear, regardless of people's political affiliation or where they're from or the type of industry that they work in. That is the common thread that runs through us. And I think, if we can come together and, I talk about this industry all the time. I really love this industry. I feel so at home in it, because we're all trying to do that thing. We're trying to leave this place better. We're trying to make the impact on the world real, and we're all starting in our little corners of the world, on our teams and our companies and so forth. And I think if we can use our network, and we can use this community to bolster ourselves and inject some more motivation in us, we can really take advantage of a lot of these opportunities that are going to pop up. There's just going to be so many opportunities. Like Christy said, all these different regulations, all these new problems, all these new technologies, those are going to create new opportunities and new problems for us to solve. New political environment, a new way for us to serve. All those things are ways for us to push our agenda forward. I don't think any of us work in an organization that is living out the ideal culture of integrity or the ideal culture of compliance that we want. Great. Let's use this now to close that gap between that ideal and what's actual right now. So I really loved today. I mean, I had really high expectations for this august cast of, phenomenal thought leaders, and you guys really blew it out of the water. Thousands of emojis, hundreds of comments here. It's really been great. I think if we can lift our heads up, keep our eyes on that prize and, open our ears to the voices in our organization, we really can start to activate some people that maybe weren't activated before. And if we can use this as a catalyst, I think we can really, fast forward to that future that we're all kind of building towards. So thank you all. I think next Thursday is Thanksgiving, right? Is that right? So we're not going to be having one next week. So just watch football, put some sweatpants on and hang out on the couch. And we'll be back the following week with another one. So love you all. So glad to be back, and we'll see you. Happy Thanksgiving.